Welcome to a new series on the channel, a deep dive series where we take a look at 50 of the top teams in college football. Today, we are going to start with the TCU Horned Frogs. We're going to take a look at the coaching staff. We're going to go position by position and break down what this team is going to look like in 2024, what are expectations for this team, and look at the strengths and weaknesses, as well as taking a look at the schedule at the end and look at some predictions for how this season will play out. Sonny Dykes brings a lot to the table. He's an exciting, explosive offensive mind, and he's brought in coordinators to continue that tradition. Now, last year was a little bit of a step back when you look at explosiveness and whatnot, but there are also a lot of really good things that this team brings to the table in 2024. A 5-7 finish obviously wasn't what we expected. The loss to Colorado to start the year wasn't exactly what this program wanted or needed, but you've found a way to bounce back in some games. And now in 2024, you're looking to turn things around and get back on track. You bring in Kendall Briles for last year, and I really like what Briles can do as a play caller. I think that he's done a lot of good things at multiple different stops. Specifically, you look at what he did at Arkansas and what he did to KJ Jefferson, and now you bring it to a team that has, again, a lot of potential heading into 2024. The bigger hire to me for this season, at least the one that really stood out is Andy Avalos, the former Boise State coach who got fired this past year. I think that was a home run hire if you're looking at coordinators and whatnot. Avalos is a really good defensive mind, and he has a group that's very talented. Does have to replace some key players, but I really like what this defense could be in 2024. A defense, again, under Joe Gillespie, 2 years ago when they made the playoff, I think that you knew this was going to be a team that was going to thrive off turnovers. They weren't going to be an elite team that shut people down. They weren't going to be a big reason why they won games, but they were going to capitalize on turnovers. And the turnover luck kind of ran out last year. They didn't get nearly as many of those opportunities. And you saw a defense that, again, took a little bit of a step back. It's not because they didn't have the talent. It just, they just took a step back because the turnovers weren't coming and they weren't that shutdown defense that you need if the turnovers aren't going in your favor. So Avalos has a big job to do. He has some big opportunities ahead of him, and it'll be interesting to see what his impact will be on this defense. We talked about the shifts of this team in terms of talent added and talent lost. And in this day and age of the transfer portal, there has been plenty of movement, and that is the Horned Frogs are no exception to that. When you look at some of the players that they lost, losing Dominic Williams was arguably the biggest loss of any team in the Big 12. His presence up the middle leaves a gaping hole for this defense to address. And that's going to be interesting to see how they replace that. In terms of the rest of transfer portal, I don't think that TCU lost a ton where you have to be worried for any position besides defensive tackle. Losing Chandler Morris to the transfer portal. Obviously, you have your quarterback situation figured out, so losing him isn't a huge loss, but maybe you lose a little bit of that depth. But we'll dive into that more a little bit later. Additions, though, is really where I think this staff thrives, and this has been another year of good additions for Sonny Dykes and his coaching staff. When you look at some of the talent you bring in, you get Eric McAllister pretty easily from Boise State, follows, and you get Andy Avalos, who's very familiar with his game. That'll be an interesting player to watch. And Lamarian James from Old Dominion, Taylor Elarms Orr from Cal, and you get the list goes on and on. There are a number of players, and we'll dive into them a little bit more in detail. When you look at this list, it's easy to see why there's excitement for this program because they have so many new faces that can do a lot of good things for this program and can turn things around. Again, when you look at last year and what happened, you obviously feel disappointed coming into 2024, but you're also hopeful that this is going to turn around. And it's easy to see how that's going to happen with the talent that you bring in on top of the talent that you have returning. And that's going to start with the offense. Again, Sonny Dykes is known for his offense. And this was a group that, again, there's a lot of good things about this group. There are a lot of exciting things coming back, and obviously it all starts with Josh Hoover. And when you look at the last couple of years, the Chandler Morris, Max Duggan quarterback competition 2 years ago was the talk of this program. And then last year, Chandler Morris has his chance to take over, and that doesn't really go very well. So Josh Hoover takes over, and you saw some excitement. Again, we've seen this before. We've seen what can happen in a Sonny Dykes offense. And it'll be interesting to see because Kendall Briles has had so many different body types at quarterback, but he has done such a good job with so many of them. Now, Hoover doesn't have the biggest arm. He is not going to just unleash a bunch of deep balls like other quarterbacks that Briles has coached in the past, but he is someone who can get the ball to his playmakers and make some really good throws. 2,200 yards last year, 15 touchdowns. I just really like what he brings to the table. You have someone who can be an electric playmaker, an underrated athlete who can get out in space and make plays with his legs. That's another aspect of this offense that is going to be a factor in 2024. Hoover is a really fun player when it comes to that. Joining him in the backfield, this is where things get really interesting because when you lose Imani Bailey, when you lose the talent that TCU's had in the backfield the last couple of years, you know that you're going to have to figure things out quickly. And this is a group that finished 71st in rushing. So there's definitely room for improvement in this area for sure. And I honestly think that they will improve. I think that everybody's really high on Cam Cook. I know that a lot of people are excited about his abilities. Yeah, the production obviously from last year isn't what they're excited about because he didn't get a ton of opportunities, but there's the talent level that you have to fall back on. Trey Sanders is back for one final season. Hopefully, you're finding some big things from him. Hopefully, you're going to see a lot of explosive plays. He's a little bit bigger in terms of frame, so you're going to look at a player that I think has a lot of potential for this rushing attack. Again, a rushing attack that is supposed to be much better. That's going to be an interesting group to watch. Now, when it comes to depth, that's I think really what excites me. You obviously want to see someone take that step as the go-to guy, but who is it going to be? Is it going to be Cook? Is it going to be Sanders? Trent Battle is back. He's another guy who is waiting for his turn, waiting for his opportunity to get more touches. And another player to keep an eye on is Dominique Johnson. The Arkansas transfer is a little bit under the radar. I don't think a lot of people expect big things from him, but he is an underrated runner, a little bit on the smaller size in terms of frame, but he is a tough runner. When you go back and watch his from a couple of years ago, this is a guy who can make an impact. So don't sleep on him. That's another player who could step up and be a part of this rotation. I really like this backfield and another year with Kendall Briles calling the plays. The guys are a little bit more familiar with that playbook, and Josh Hoover gets a full year to showcase what he can do in this offense. Now, the passing attack, I think a lot of people are excited of what the passing attack can be, and there are certain players that have potential for a huge year. And this is a group that finished seventh in passing last year, and Hoover's going to play a big role in getting them to do that once again. And one of the more exciting things for me is the use of Savion Williams. This is someone who everyone expected to replace Quentin Johnston, and I don't know if he necessarily got used the right way as we expected. And when you look at what he brings to the table at 6'5, 225 pounds, it's easy to see why he can be an absolute monster in the passing game. He can be Josh Hoover's go-to target, and he's an explosive player that there are some people I think believe he's better than what Quentin Johnston was for TCU. And Quentin Johnston was really fun to watch. He was an exciting player. And Savion Williams could be that explosive playmaker that they need. Fortunately for TCU, they have plenty of other options. Another former transfer that we've mentioned in years past, JP Richardson is another guy that can make defenses sweat a little bit extra. Again, 536 yards and three touchdowns isn't exactly intimidating, but he is a good playmaker, a player that can make a lot of plays for this offense, a guy who can stretch the field, does a lot of good things in the short to intermediate routes. And that's huge because Savion Williams can be that deep threat, but also Eric McAllister can be that guy too. We mentioned him earlier. The Boise State transfer had a huge year for the Broncos with 873 yards and 5 touchdowns. And I say that's huge because when you look at what Boise State did last year, throwing the football was not their strength. Throwing the football was not what they were good at. And it was easy to see when you look on film. This is a team that struggled. When you have Ashton Genty running the football, it's easy to see why you stick to the ground game. The running backs at that team were much deeper than the wide receivers. So a guy like Eric McAllister having that type of year was pretty exciting. And he's going to be with TCU for a couple of years. So we'll see what he can do in this new system. But he has a lot of exciting traits. 6'3", 195 pounds, another of that longer frame where you can utilize him more in the deep game. And he's an explosive player that I am expecting to do a lot of big things for this offense. When you lost Jared Wiley, you knew that you needed a replacement. Drake Dabney appears to be that guy. 6'5", 248 pounds, maybe not as long as Wiley was, but a great addition to replace a player that was, I think, underrated in college football. And I think that Drake Dabney is a great replacement, given that this team doesn't have a ton of depth at the position. So Dabney kind of needs to be that guy. When you look at what he did at Baylor, you can see the potential in what he can do for TCU's passing attack. So there's a lot of exciting things with the transfers they bring in. There's a lot of exciting things with this wide receiver group. Even when you look at depth, which Williams, Richardson, and McAllister to me are the top three guys, but they are going to be a part of a rotation. There are guys that will give them some trouble in terms of pushing for reps. A guy like Dalen Wright is one of those players, someone who can be an explosive playmaker. The former Texas A&M and Minnesota transfer has a lot of potential, just needs to put it all together on the field. JoJo Earl is another player that has explosive potential. We've seen some of his plays that he's made in practices and even in games. You've seen the potential in his game, the quickness, the explosiveness. That's another player that could step up. Major Everhart, another guy that could be in that conversation as well. So there's plenty of talent to go around. It's just a matter of chemistry. Josh Hoover, I think, knows what he's getting out of certain guys. Obviously, he'll have to figure things out with McAllister and Dabney, but this is one of the better receiving groups, I think, in college football this year. And we'll see which guy becomes the alpha of that group and how deep this pass catching group can actually be. Now, the offensive line will play a huge role in that. And when you look at what they have returning, experience is, I don't want to say coming at a premium, but there's not a ton of starting experience. If you take away Carson Bruno's starts, there's a combined 11 starts between the projected starters. And Carson Bruno is a solid option from Louisiana Tech, a great addition in the transfer portal. I think this is the group that's the X factor of the offense. You can make an argument that that is the case, and I think that they are going to determine how explosive this offense can be. You get a Alabama transfer in James Brockermeyer. His brother just medically retired, so that's a nice addition, especially at center when you need someone to lead the way. Bless Harris at right tackle. That's a guy who he hasn't quite put it all together, but I think that if you put him in the right offense and give him the chance to start, you'll see the talent. Now, how high his ceiling is remains to be seen, but the fact that this is his opportunity to showcase what he can do, and you're given a new group essentially to gel together, it's going to take some time, but there's a lot of talent. A guy like Bless Harris is one of those guys. Texas A&M transfer Remington Strickland. You even look at San Diego State guard Cade Bennett, that you're getting transfers coming in, and there's talent. There's no doubting that. But what does that mean for chemistry? How quickly can this group gel? How quickly can they be dominant to get that rushing attack? Again, this rushing attack finished 71st. How are you going to get explosive plays? How are you going to break things out? Because one of the bigger things that we saw with TCU's run at the college football playoff national championship game was the fact that they could break off some explosive runs. And I don't think you saw that as much last year. So this is a group that's going to dictate how balanced this offense is going to be. An underrated player to me at tackle is Mike Nichols. This is someone who I think is very underrated, under the radar, relatively unknown, even within the Big 12. And it'll be fun to see what he can do. Again, this is a group that is essentially all brand new. You're looking at a group that needs to find chemistry with each other. They need to figure out how to communicate with each other. How do they handle certain twists, certain blitzes? That's going to be things that are a huge obstacle right off the bat. And again, the skill position talent to me is set. There's really not a ton of questions about that group. I think we know who's going to be what for that group, but the offensive line, I think, determines more than what that group does. If the offensive line is up to speed and ready to go, then this offense will be, again, one of the most explosive in college football. And if not, then we might see a repeat of last year. It is going to put more stress on the defense. And the defense, I think, has the talent, but do they have enough consistency to put it together? And we're going to talk about Marcus Deal here for a little bit. Now, Timon Mitchell could be in this conversation as well. So we'll talk about both of them. Dominic Williams did a lot of very good things for this TCU Horned Frogs defense. This defensive line thrived when he was playing at his best. This is a group that can be very disruptive, but losing him leaves a major hole. And a lot of that pressure goes on Mitchell and Deal. If you're able to step up, I don't think anyone expects them to be Dominic Williams. I don't think anyone expects the production that Dominic Williams provided. But I think people expect that the level of play is still steady, is still consistent, and that falls on two of these guys. And obviously, the defensive ends will play their role as well, and the linebackers too. We'll see what kind of effect Avalos has on this group, because when you look at what he had at Boise State, he had a number of talented players at defensive line. Linebacker is probably where he saw more success, and this is a group at linebacker that is a very talented group. But the defensive tackle position is probably the one that has the circle around it for most people. What does that group look like? Can a guy like Marcus Deal be the guy, or can Timon Mitchell be that player? They're both going to see time. They're both going to get their opportunities to replace Williams, but replacing him just isn't going to be easy, plain and simple. Now, when you look at the defensive end position, you bring in a transfer like Nana Osafo-Mensah, and you're expecting big things probably right off the bat. Now, this is a group that finished 103rd in total yards. The pass defense is probably really what killed this group the most. And it wasn't because a lack of talent. I think that TCU had plenty of talent to get the job done. They just either weren't getting to the quarterback, or the secondary wasn't hanging on long enough. So that's something that needs to change. And the Notre Dame transfer can make a big impact. He had 5.5 tackles for loss and 3 sacks last year. And now you're expecting him to help this new TCU defense even more. And Paul Oyewale is another guy who can be in that at that realm. Now, when you look at this group has size. Asafa Mensu, 6'3", 264 pounds. Oyewale is 6'4", 275. So it's not like this group is going to be small. They shouldn't get pushed around. It's just a matter of being able to be disruptive, getting to the quarterback. And I think that there's plenty of talent to go around too. You're going to see a good rotation. Devin Deal from Tulane had a big year, 13 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. Caleb Fox comes back for this group. So it's not a matter of talent. The talent level should still be fine, but can you elevate your game even more? And if they can, then it's going to start all up front. And if they can elevate that talent, if they can elevate their play, then you're in good hands. Behind them is really where things will get interesting, because some of the success at linebacker is going to be dictated by what the group up front can do. Can you get to the quarterback? Can you pick up extra blockers because you're getting to your gap quick, or you're shedding your block? The requirements from the offense to block the defensive line probably dictates how successful this linebacker group is. And this is a good group. I really like this TCU linebacking group. Johnny Hodges is back after a shortened year in 2023. You obviously, everyone knows him from with having the neck plate. That stands out the most. A tackling machine 2 years ago, and they're hoping that he can be the same. Underrated transfer, Caleb Elam's or from Cal, 92 tackles last year, 3.5 tackles for loss. He's a bigger body that fits in well with this team. I'm excited to see what he can do. And then you have leading tackler Namdi Obiazor coming back as well. 84 tackles last year, 6 tackles for loss. I really like what this group can do. And then we talk about depth. That's really where, to me, things get interesting. Shad Banks probably sniffs any other lineup, probably even starts for a lot of other teams, but he, to me, is going to still be in the rotation. I mean, being a starter in this group probably doesn't matter as much because you're going to rotate guys so much. I'm really excited to see what he can do in this defense, how he's going to be utilized. Again, Avalos brings so many exciting things to the table, especially with the linebacker group. Again, when you go back and look at his Boise State teams, his linebackers were playmakers, and he has the talent in this group to do that for TCU in this new Big 12. And you're going to need it because you're going to face a lot of different offenses, a lot of explosive offenses, and your linebackers play a huge role in slowing them down. Jonathan Bax, another player, 6'3", 235 pounds. I'm really excited to see what he can do. Cooper McDonald comes in from San Diego State, and I think that he is a great depth piece for this group. Again, when you need a rotational player to step up, Cooper McDonald, you can do a lot worse than Cooper McDonald. I think he's a solid player that, like I said, it's kind of one of those maybe a lower ceiling, but a higher floor kind of player that gives you a lot of exciting depth for a group that to me is going to be really fun, a big time impact position. And again, if the defensive line can do its part and keep things open for the guys behind them, they're going to make a ton of plays and be more disruptive. And we go back to the secondary. For a while, TCU's secondary under Gary Patterson was producing NFL draft picks left and right. And I wouldn't say that that has changed a ton, but you're looking at a step back in terms of defending the points last year. 113th. I think that needs to get better. Now, you do have a guy like Bud Clark, who is a natural playmaker. I still see him picking off JJ McCarthy in the Fiesta Bowl and running back for a touchdown. He knows how to make plays. He's a proven playmaker that has done it time and time again, and he's going to do it again this year. Teams obviously know who he is. They're going to try to stay away from him, but at a certain point, there's only so much you can do. When you look at what he brings to the table, he has a knack for getting to the football. And now he takes on more of a leadership role. So we'll see how he does with that because you have some new players and some younger players that need to get up to speed. And the transfers to me are going to be the bigger question mark because a guy like Lemarian James, really talented, but you have to find a way to get him up to speed quick. And I know that they're already working on that. And you've seen other guys like Avery Helm is another one, comes in from Florida last year, and you had to get him up to speed. So Bud Clark has that experience, and he leads by example as well, which is really exciting. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Joining Clark at the safety position is a player that I'm intrigued by a lot. Jamel Johnson is someone who could have a big year with teams focusing on Clark. Again, when you know that you have a player like Bud Clark, it benefits you. It could hurt you, but I think it benefits you a lot because you know that teams are focusing on him. Where is he lined up? What does he need to do? And that means that teams are probably going to test Johnson a little bit more, but it gives him opportunities. It gives him the ability to make plays and get after an opposing offense because if he's able to make plays and capitalize on that extra attention that's being sent towards Clark, then they're going to kind of sleep on him, and that gives him a chance to make a play. In the nickel position, Abe Kamara is another one of those players that could benefit from Clark. Again, Clark is going to be moved all over the field. What does that do for the attention of that opposing coordinator, of that opposing offense? Who benefits the most? Who has the most to gain? I say that Johnson and Kamara are two of those guys. Depth pieces, the transfer portal is really where this team thrived, I think, in the secondary. Travis Broughton comes from Utah. He's a former a stud for that Utah defense. I think he had a big year a couple years ago, and they're hoping that they can really bring that back out. Jace Oliver comes in from Tulsa. I really like what he can do for this team. Channing Canada is a good player for this team as well. It's a returner from last year's team, and then Cam Smith from Memphis. So there's not a lack of talent, and It's just going to be, can you put it together on the field? Can you be improved from last year? Because again, this group struggled at times, slowing people down. And that's why you bring Avalos in. You expect big things from him. You expect him to kind of fix some of those weaknesses. And that's going to be interesting to watch. This is a secondary that has talent. You really like what you're getting out of Bud Clark. I think the staff really likes what they got in Lemarian James as well, but can he handle life in the Big 12? I know that's something that we talk about a lot is, can you handle that elevation of talent, that elevation of competition? And we'll see what happens. If the answer is yes to those, then TCU's secondary with the combination of those other guys in front of them is going to be just fine. Strengths and weaknesses of this team. Kind of already went over it. Wide receiver is definitely one of them when you look at what they have coming back. Savion Williams is going to be a big time player. JP Richardson, really good. Eric McAllister, a big time transfer. And you could even throw Drake Nabney in there. So more just pass catchers than wide receiver, but wide receiver is a very deep group. Linebacker, we already talked about that. My excitement for that group. Safety to me is a good group in that secondary. The question is just going to be at nickelback and cornerback as well. Concerns to me, what is the running back group? You have four options, but who's going to be that guy? Do they have an alpha in that group? They have someone that can step up and be that guy. Cam Cook is a player that people like a lot. Trey Sanders is an option. We talked about that. That'll be interesting to see. Quarterback depth is also a question with Chandler Morris leaving in the transfer portal. That means that Josh Hoover is the guy for sure. And what are you going to get in terms of depth? You bring in Ken Seals from Vanderbilt. So that's a solid piece, but is he a good enough depth piece where if Hoover needs a breather or whatever, if he goes down, does that take a step back for the offense? Defensive tackle shouldn't be a big surprise in terms of concerns. That's obviously going to happen when you lose a player like Dominic Williams. We talked about that and what needs to happen there. X factor is obviously the offensive line. If the offensive really is just probably the trenches, honestly. Offensive line, though, on the offensive side of the ball is really where things get interesting. The 2024 schedule to me has some exciting things for this team. There isn't a game where I worry about them a lot. Now, you obviously have some things to figure out. We talked about some concerns. We talked about what this team needs to do better, but there are still a lot of things with the TCU, both offensively and defensively, that you could see a 9-3 season. Could you see 10-2? Potentially. A 7.5 over under to me feels like an over. And I think that ceiling to me is at 9-3. Now, there are games that I would say you're feeling more comfortable in terms of wins. At Stanford to start year is a little bit trickier than I think people will expect. That is a group that I think is supposed to be much better than they were last year, and it's on the road. That's a tough one to start, but I think that TCU should be able to win that. LIU, we don't really need to talk about. UCF at home is a tough one to have because you start a 2-game road trip at SMU, a rivalry game, and at Kansas, a team that is supposed to be very good. That's, I think, the one thing that a lot of people are excited about for the Big 12 this year is the depth. The depth of this conference is really what makes this interesting. So to me, having UCF, SMU, and Kansas in 3 games in a row, that makes it very difficult. Now, do I think that TCU can win all of those games? Yes, that is definitely a possibility. Is it likely? No, probably not. In fact, you have to go to at SMU and at Kansas is really intriguing and two completely different challenges. The Houston game, if Willie Fritz has that team turned around, then maybe that's a little bit more difficult than expected, but probably not. It's probably one of those you can feel comfortable with a win. Then you go at Utah. Here's the thing: you can't get caught looking ahead to 2 weeks from then. And granted, that's probably not going to happen because you have those 2 weeks. But Utah is going to be a contender for this conference, and playing them isn't going to be easy. You're going to have to find ways to stop the run. That's going to be a physical game. And again, that's where the defensive line really needs to be ready because at this point, you know if this defensive line is up for the task. And playing against a team like Utah is going to test that for sure. Texas Tech is a team that I think has the potential to take a step forward and be really intriguing this year. So keep an eye on them. TCU, definitely can play and compete with all these teams. It's just a matter of, at this point, are we going to know if this team is a contender, or are they struggling to get to a bowl game and sort of a repeat of last year at Baylor? I don't really know what we're going to get out of Baylor. I think that they're going to be better, but again, this depth of this conference is really probably what worries me the most about TCU. Are you able to win games that are going to be tough? And a game like road trip to Waco is one of those that could be pretty tricky, especially with Oklahoma State coming to town and Arizona after that. So Oklahoma State and Arizona are two teams again that are going to contend for this conference title, and they are going to be really good teams. They bring two different styles to this game. Oklahoma State's obviously got Ollie Gordon stopping the run, kind of similar to that Utah, where you're going to have to figure that out. But also, they have a pretty solid passing attack as well. That's going to test them. That's an explosive offense. Arizona's passing attack is electric. So again, at the end of the season, you're going to know one way or another, what does this team look like, and the game at Cincinnati at the end, it should be a win. But again, you never know in this conference. There's certain games that feel like wins, but with how deep this conference is, you just never know what you're going to get and what TCU will look like and whatnot. So it'll be fun to see what TCU can do. Sonny Dykes has done a great job of bringing in talent, recruiting talent, bringing talent in from the transfer portal, hiring coordinators that I believe are good hires. Kendall Briles obviously knows what he's doing offensively. Andy Avalos probably has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder after getting fired from Boise State. So this is a team that has a lot of potential. Maybe you're a little higher than I am in terms of a ceiling. 9-3 feels like a realistic ceiling. Obviously, they could probably win every game, but I don't think that's a strong possibility. I think that a ceiling to me is 9-3. There are a lot of games that are going to be tough. And when you have a lot of quote unquote coin flip games, that's going to make your record a little bit worse than probably what you think. But again, there's a lot of excitement around TCU's program. Maybe I'm just more excited than the casual fan, but I really like what this team has returning. I really like what this team has in terms of talent. And I think that this is going to be a really good group in 2024.